Those Who Are Important to Us. Written by Artemis 13. Read by Arashi. Being back at Enbar, especially the palace, was a lot more welcome than Ferdinand had been expecting. Even when they reached the capital, he could see anxiety roll off his friend's shoulders. While he had only been to the palace a few times, merely following his father to watch him conduct business, he still selfishly thought of the palace as becoming his second home someday. He wanted to stand at the left hand of Edelgard, while Hubert stood at her right. "Do you know where Hubert has gone to?" Ferdinand asked Edelgard. She was currently talking with Shez, but the two were wrapping up their conversation. Monica was also there between the two of them, but she was not engaged in the conversation. She was too busy glaring daggers at Shez. The three of them turned to him once his question had been asked. "No, I don't know where he's gone off to. But if I had to guess, he might be in the Imperial household wing," Edelgard responded with a logical deduction that Ferdinand should have thought up himself. "Are you seeking him for any reason in particular?" At this, Ferdinand flutters a bit. All three of them look at him a little more intently. "Not particularly. It is just strange to see you without him at your side. I was merely wondering what is so pressing that he has taken his attention away from you." "Nothing is more important than Her Majesty," Monica pipes up, seizing the chance to berate Hubert even when the man is not here to defend himself. "Clearly he is a fool for having something take his attention away from her." She turns to Edelgard, and in that moment, from the looks Ferdinand can see in both their eyes, Monica has her full attention. "Do not worry, Your Majesty. I would never be drawn away from you. Whether we are in the same room or continents apart, I shall never stop thinking about you." Shez rolls their eyes, and Ferdinand feels the urge to as well, but resists, since it would be unbecoming of a nobleman such as himself. Edelgard's blush is as red as the flames that encompass her axe during battle. Upon seeing the Emperor blush, Monica also turns a similar color. "Well then, if you say he is in the Imperial household wing, that is where I will check," Ferdinand says, cutting the tension like a sword through an enemy. "I will let you know if I find him." He starts to walk off, faster than he should have, but he doubts Edelgard or Monica notice. But he does not get far before Shez calls out, "Maybe you can keep him occupied for a while." Ferdinand turns back to see the smirk that is spread across Shez's face, and he stops in his tracks. He can't help where his thoughts wander at their suggestion. Of all the different ways he could keep Hubert busy, of all the ways he has thought of keeping Hubert busy in the past, he'd never acted on any of his more intimate thoughts. But now that they were back in the capital and had a moment of respite from the war, maybe... Ferdinand shakes his head, chasing his daydreams from it as well, but not before Shez's smirk widens a little more. Ferdinand feels a light blush creeping onto his own face. "I will see what I can do," Ferdinand quickly says, before again picking up his pace to start his search for Hubert. Walking around the palace, Ferdinand is left alone with his thoughts. It allows him to sort out his scattered emotions before he finds Hubert. He would hate for the other to see him in his current state. However, sorting through his feelings only leads him towards more turmoil. Ferdinand is reminded of the night in base camp, when Hubert walked in on him researching the current precedent for laws. He had noticed that Hubert's piercing green eyes were even more deadly in the darkness, with only a candle to illuminate them. They had talked for a bit on how to best bring Ferdinand's father to justice, but they hadn't reached a clear conclusion. Ferdinand had also accused Hubert of killing his father, and he didn't outright deny it, so Ferdinand figured his suspicions might be right. He expressed his wishes to once again have his father properly brought to justice, and not slain for his treason. The only reply he got to his pleas was a solemn yet stern look in Hubert's eyes. Feeling frustrated and not wanting to end the night in disappointment, Ferdinand invited Hubert to have a cup of tea with him. Hubert had denied at first, claiming he had other matters to attend to while Edelgard wasn't around, but he eventually relented and admitted that he had stopped to check on Ferdinand for a break in the first place. Instead of drinking tea, Hubert drank coffee, and Ferdinand furiously berated him for his untimely, and obviously inferior, drink choice. Hubert argued back that he hadn't the faintest clue how Ferdinand could drink, quote, hot leaf water. Strangely, it had been one of Ferdinand's nicest evenings since the war had started. After that night, he and Hubert had started to spend more time together, and if you asked the right person, they might even say that Ferdinand and Hubert were friends. If only that person could have peered into Ferdinand's mind and seen his true thoughts about Hubert. Ferdinand had seen so many sides of Hubert, and he loved every one of them. The way Hubert captured Ferdinand's attention whenever he set off a devastating burst of dark magic, and let out an equally dark laugh as he saw the enemy fall to the ground. The way he tried to accommodate everyone's preferences, especially Lysithea. He seemed to have a soft spot for the young girl, to keep morale high in times of war. The way that no matter what time of day it was, Hubert looked as tired and pale as death, but still continued to work tirelessly for the sake of Edelgard and her war. Ferdinand loved Hubert. He wasn't sure when it happened, but it did, and here he was. Ferdinand was left with feelings he knew would never be requited. He was left with feelings he would never be able to voice out loud, because according to his knowledge, Hubert von Vestra didn't do feelings, especially not the romantic kind. He wandered around a bit more until someone working in the palace took pity on him and led him towards the Imperial household wing. Ferdinand thanked the worker for their assistance before continuing further down the hall. He didn't realize until he saw the array of doors leading down the hallway, and most likely also spanning past it, that he had no idea what room Hubert could possibly be in. Determined not to give up, Ferdinand started opening the doors to every room that would open, until he either saw Hubert or came along a locked door that gave him a response. The second option happened first, after trying about a dozen doors. He didn't hear Hubert respond to the rattling locked door, but he could hear the sound of muffled whispers and footsteps inside. "Hubert, are you in there? I have been trying to find you for a while now." Instead of a response, Ferdinand was met with silence that, a few seconds later, was followed by the opening of the door to reveal Hubert. He felt his heart quicken slightly when he met Hubert's striking green eyes, but Ferdinand didn't let his emotions show visibly. "What do you want?" Hubert responded, already sounding out of patience for Ferdinand. Ferdinand could tell he was resisting the urge to rub the bridge of his nose in irritation. "I wanted to know where you were." His own words sounded stilted, but he really hadn't a reason for wanting to find Hubert besides missing the other's looming presence. "Well, congratulations. You found me." Hubert was already moving to close the door, but something seems off to Ferdinand. Hubert is being more defensive and curt than usual. "Wait a moment, Hubert," Ferdinand calls out, and to his surprise, Hubert actually stops closing the door. "What are you doing in that room? It sounded like you were talking to someone before I tried opening the door." "I was simply discussing plans out loud to myself." Hubert brushed off the question, like he had been practicing his response for this particular situation. "Now, Ferdinand, if you would please leave me alone, and I will return—" "Ferdinand?" A feminine voice spoke from inside the room. Ferdinand couldn't see it or put a face to the voice because of how Hubert was standing in front of the door. "As in Ferdinand von Eyre? The guy you've been telling me about? The one that goes in a fight proclaiming his name loudly for all to hear?" Ferdinand would have been offended if it wasn't true. In comparison, Hubert looked like he was ready to start his own fight with whomever was on the other side of the door. He took a deep breath before speaking. "If you'll excuse me for a moment." Hubert doesn't wait for Ferdinand to respond before he closes the door in Ferdinand's face. Ferdinand is left there for a second to remember the girl's words, and he has to wonder who she is, but he can't come to any conclusions. Wanting answers, and being the curious person that he was, Ferdinand cautiously checked to see if the door was still unlocked. It was, and so Ferdinand slowly opened the door so that he could see just who Hubert was talking to. The sight that greeted him was, of course, Hubert, and the girl whose voice he had heard just moments earlier. She had long black hair that went down to her waist, but it was tied back so as not to get in her way. Ferdinand couldn't see her face well from where he was. However, it looked like she had a few locks of hair covering one of her eyes, much like Hubert does. As for her outfit, she was wearing the typical clothes of the Imperial household, similar to the ones Ferdinand remembered Hubert wearing in their earlier days before Garrick Mach. "What did I tell you about staying quiet and staying hidden? Is that so difficult for you to do?" Hubert says to the girl in a harsh whisper. She looks back at him with an intense gaze in her eyes. "Well, I'm sorry that you talk about the guy so much. Is it so wrong for me to want to meet the guy my brother has a—" "Brother?" Ferdinand speaks without even realizing the question coming out of his mouth. Both Hubert and his sister. Hubert has a sister, and he had never told anyone. Ferdinand could hardly believe that he had kept it a secret for so long. Actually, Edelgard probably knew the truth. Turned to look at him. He can finally see the girl's eyes well, and Ferdinand notices that they are a cold and icy blue. "Ferdinand, so glad to finally make your acquaintance. I'm Medea, and, as you've probably assumed, I'm Hubert's younger sister." Ferdinand stands there in shock for a few moments. It seems like so much information to process when, in fact, it is very simple. Hubert has a younger sister. "Oh, you look like you're so excited to meet you that you can't even speak," Medea teases him. "Has Hubert never talked about me? He almost never mentions me because of, why is it that you never mention your family to anyone again?" Medea clearly knows the answer, and just wants to poke fun at her brother for having one of his most carefully guarded secrets be found out. "You could be a liability to me and Her Majesty's plans," Hubert manages to say through gritted teeth. Ferdinand understands why he would be upset by this development, but Ferdinand is also glad that he now gets to learn about this side of Hubert as well.
And I always tell you that I'm capable of becoming a liability. You should know better than anyone that I can handle myself in a fight and in a few dark schemes.
But you don't have to, and I will protect you from having to deal with such things, Hubert says with a clear resolve in his voice.
Flames, Hubert! You can't treat me like a child forever. I'm only 2 years younger than Her Majesty. Maybe you're the one who needs to grow up and accept that I can handle myself.
Ferdinand feels very awkward all of a sudden. He decides to try and make himself scarce, but when he turns to the door to try and make his escape, he sees a younger child reaching for the doorknob. Ferdinand sees the child visibly tense at being noticed. "Ah, do not worry. I will not hurt you," Ferdinand says to the kid over the sound of Hubert and Medea's bickering behind him. "I am Ferdinand von Eyre. What is your name?" He keeps his distance from the kid, lest he scare him more, and he starts to take in the kid's features. The boy has fluffy, short white hair, not quite like Edelgard or Lysithea. It looked more natural, but it wasn't what drew Ferdinand's attention. He takes immediate notice of the boy's bright green eyes that were just like...
I don't have to tell you anything,
the kid responds, not looking completely sure of what he's saying. For the third time in the past few minutes, Ferdinand is at a loss. "See," Hubert says, drawing Ferdinand's attention back to him. "Look how good he is at not revealing vital information."
"Don't be like that, Hubert. And don't you be like that either, Albanius."
Medea cuts in and reveals the boy's name, much to Ferdinand's delight and Hubert's dismay.
"Besides, Ferdinand here might be your brother-in-law one day, Albanius."
The young boy, Albanius, as Ferdinand has learned, was now looking at Ferdinand like he was studying Ferdinand with awe. Ferdinand stared back at Albanius with what he was sure was a similar expression. He was starting to connect the dots. If Medea was Hubert's sister, and she had just made a joke about Ferdinand someday being Albanius's brother-in-law... "Hubert, you also have a younger brother that you have not told anyone about?" Ferdinand stated. "Hubert, you also have a younger brother that you have not told anyone about," Ferdinand stated, turning back to Hubert and his sister.
"Wow, Hubert, you sure know how to pick 'em,"
Medea said once again, taunting Hubert in a way that Ferdinand didn't quite understand.
"He's perceptive, if not a little dull around the edges."
Hubert sighed deeply before he responded to either Medea or Ferdinand. "If it makes you sleep better at night, Her Majesty knows, Ferdinand. Medea, will you please stop bringing my private matters up?"
"Will you start telling people that me and Albanius exist?"
They shared a look, and while Ferdinand can't read minds, he can read Hubert. He knows that look means no. Ferdinand can see the two siblings are about to get into another squabble, but he has resigned himself to his fate, so he's content to watch it happen. He watches both Hubert and Medea bicker more about the previous topic before he feels something tug on his overcoat. Ferdinand looks down a little bit to see Albanius.
"You're the person that Big Brother Hubert was talking about, that rides into battle on a horse, right?"
Albanius questions in a meek voice. "That is right," Ferdinand responds in kind, with a bright smile and a gentle voice. "My horse and I share a very special bond on and off the battlefield." Albanius perks up a little at Ferdinand's answer.
"What's it like to ride a horse? I've always wanted to, but Medea won't let me until I'm older, and Big Brother Hubert has always had a fear of horses after he tried to ride a Pegasus once."
Ferdinand couldn't help his smile from growing wider. "Albanius..." Hubert stopped his debate with his sister and inhaled sharply. "Well, I suppose there is little to no use in trying to hide any more information. Would you all like to do formal introductions, or something along those lines?" His voice sounds more sarcastic towards the end, but Ferdinand, and he's sure both of Hubert's siblings as well, can see that there's no actual meaning behind it. If Ferdinand is reading him right, he might even say that Hubert might be the slightest bit happy at this turn of events.
"I'm not sure I really need a formal introduction from Ferdinand with how much I already know about him,"
Medea replied cheekily with a smirk on her face. "Ah, but it is the duty of a noble to introduce themselves formally in every situation," Ferdinand replied, never forgetting his noble ways. Before Ferdinand could start his rehearsed self-introduction, Albanius spoke up.
"Sir von Eyre, may I introduce myself first? I haven't had a lot of practice introducing myself to others, and you seem good at it."
Ferdinand could feel his heart melt at little Albanius's request. "But of course you can go first." Ferdinand stepped back to stand with Hubert and Medea so that he could properly see Albanius introduce himself. Both Hubert and his sister looked fond of the small boy, and Ferdinand would be lying if he said he wasn't feeling a similar feeling, despite only knowing the boy for a short time.
"I am Albanius von Vestra. I am the third child of the former Marquis Vestra, and my older brother is the proud right hand of Her Majesty.
Hubert and Medea stood there for a heartbeat, and Ferdinand could see the love and pride for their younger brother that radiated off of both of them. All too quickly, the tender moment was shattered when one of Hubert's men burst into the room. Thankfully, Albanius was far enough from the door that he didn't get hit.
Lord Hubert, there have been sightings of assassins in the palace. We think they may be after Her Majesty's life.
Damn it all, Hubert swore while moving hastily towards the door with Ferdinand and Medea in tow.
Medea, don't you even think about joining this fight unless strictly necessary. Keep Albanius safe.
Ferdinand looked back to her, and she looked like she wanted to argue, but instead gave an understanding nod.
Is Her Majesty still in the garden, with Shez and Lady Von Ox?
Ferdinand asked the messenger.
That was where I last saw them, and if Her Majesty is still there, she is out in the open for any attack. Flames, if that is true, then we must hurry,
Hubert replied, not waiting for a response from his spy.
Search the palace and dispose of any assassin that is of little importance. I'm sure the Knights of Saros or those who slither in the dark are behind this. If we can take a prisoner of high importance, then we're sure to have an advantage over either of them.
The messenger nodded and turned in a different direction than them. They both nearly sprinted the rest of the way to the gardens, and got there just in time to see Edelgard, Monica, Shez, and... Hubert? Ferdinand stopped in his tracks upon seeing a second Hubert, but Hubert, ever dedicated to protecting his lady, rushed toward the fraud with dark magic burning at his fingertips.
"Lady Edelgard, move!"
was all Hubert said before Ferdinand was also moving to protect Edelgard. He didn't have his lance on him, but thanks to suggestions from Hubert, Ferdinand had a dagger hidden in his overcoat that he pulled out, ready to attack the assailant with. The fake Hubert dropped their disguise once they realized they had been found out, but it was too late. The magic they used to cloak themselves was the same as those who slither in the dark, and that was all it took for Hubert to release the dark magic that had been building. He released it in a devastating burst that encapsulated the assailant, but before Ferdinand could make contact with his dagger, the crafty person teleported away. He was upset that he had missed his shot to be useful, but Ferdinand also remembered what the messenger had told him and Hubert.
Edelgard!
He doesn't get a chance to finish his warning when he gets cut off.
On the roof!
Hubert calls out as the assassin shoots an arrow down towards Edelgard's head. The assassin's arrow collides with another burst of Hubert's dark magic as Shed moves to interpose themselves with Edelgard. The assassin, is that Shamir from back during their academy days? So the Knights of Saros were truly trying to kill Edelgard as well. Jumps down from their perch on the roof and tries to run off, but not before Monica could ready the blinding ball of light magic to launch at the sniper.
"How dare you try to attack Her Majesty!"
Monica yells out in rage as she launches her attack and follows behind it to chase Shamir into the palace.
"Monica, wait!"
Ferdinand calls out, and is glad that the enraged girl listens.
"We must ensure the safety of Her Majesty, and you will not be able to do that if you run after the assassin by yourself."
Monica huffs in frustration, but runs over to Shez to make sure that Edelgard is okay. "We should get to the throne room," Edelgard says, not at all looking fazed after the 2 attempts that were just made on her life. "It is one of the most secure spots in the palace, and it will also serve as a good place to launch a counterattack from."
At once, my lady.
Hubert and Monica replied in unison before glaring at each other. Ferdinand would have laughed at the situation were it not so dire. The battle was harsh, in more ways than one, but they made it out alive. Edelgard didn't get assassinated, Hubert didn't get impersonated again, and Ferdinand was currently sitting on a bench in the gardens. It was a vast contrast from the last time he was in the gardens, but right now he was trying to let himself relax. Sitting alone in the dark doesn't really fit your whole aesthetic. Ferdinand should probably be surprised to hear Hubert behind him, but after 2 years of late nights with the man, and many other situations just like this one, Ferdinand is proud to say that he is only momentarily shocked. Ferdinand turns to Hubert, and is met with the other's luminous green eyes that he can never seem to take his mind off of. The gardens at this time of night were dimly lit by lantern light, so Ferdinand couldn't make out Hubert's darkly shrouded figure that well, but the mix of lanterns and moonlight only exaggerated the man's sharp facial features. "And having 2 younger siblings that you care about does not seem to fit yours," Ferdinand quips back, with a teasing grin on his face. "If you dare mention that information to anyone, I will have you thrown to a demonic beast? Executed by your own 2 hands? Please, Hubert, spare me the frivolities. I know what you are like. I will not tell a soul about your family, but I would have hoped that you know me enough by now to come to that conclusion that I would have done that regardless of you threatening me. However, I must say that you and your siblings care for each other deeply in your own way is quite endearing." Hubert scoffs, but sits down next to Ferdinand on the bench regardless. They both sit there for a while, simply enjoying the silence before Ferdinand decides to break the lull in their conversation. "So, I was unaware that you mentioned me and my battle exploits to those you care about." Hubert let a few seconds of silence pass. "Well,
I only do it simply because you have been improving in battle lately. Don't get your hopes up thinking I compliment you every chance I get."
"Of course not," Ferdinand says with an airy tone to his voice. The conversation dies out again, but it's a comfortable silence that exists between the two of them. Ferdinand can finally feel the exhaustion hitting his body, and if he and Hubert were something a bit different, he might even have the courage to lean against the other for comfort. Instead, he stretches out slightly, and then resumes his original position. They sit there a while longer, enjoying each other's presence as the night passes by them, until Hubert decides to delicately break their quiet peace.
"I should apologize for the comment Medea made earlier," Hubert says, while not giving any more of an explanation than that.
"Which comment?" Ferdinand says to try and get a more clear statement out of Hubert. He knows that Hubert doesn't like to apologize, but he could at least be a little more concise than that. "She seemed to say a lot of things that made you vaguely annoyed." Ferdinand could see that Hubert was apprehensive to continue, but he also knew that Hubert didn't have a way out of explaining himself. Hubert sighs before he finally gives Ferdinand an answer. "The wisecrack that she made, about saying that you could one day be Albanius's brother-in-law." Ferdinand studies Hubert's face, and by the end of his explanation, Ferdinand can see Hubert blushing. Now, of course, it could just be the light hitting him from this strange angle, though a soft glow did make Hubert radiate a warm energy that Ferdinand was currently appreciating, because Hubert von Vestra would never become flustered like this. "Ah, I get it," Ferdinand said, coming to a realization. Hubert seemed to look at him expectantly, so Ferdinand gave him a bright smile in response. "You are embarrassed that Medea revealed Albanius as your brother before either of you could properly tell me." Another emotion played across Hubert's face that Ferdinand had never seen before tonight. Exasperation. Ferdinand wasn't quite sure how to respond to this new development. "Did I say something wrong? I have never seen you look so surprised before."
"Goddess, Medea was right," Hubert said while letting out what sounded like a self-deprecating laugh. "You are dull around the edges."
Ferdinand was at a loss for words, but he decided to immediately take to defending himself in his shining personality and intellect. "I shall have you know I am not as dull as you or your sister make me out to be. In fact, if I were to become Albanius's brother-in-law—" Ferdinand trailed off into thought. How could he be Albanius's brother-in-law? The only way for that to happen were if he were to marry Hubert. The realization must have shown on his face. Ferdinand can feel his face heating up so fast, and he can see Hubert snickering at him. "It seems you have finally realized the implications of her quip." Somehow, Ferdinand can feel the heat on his face double as he tries to piece together a response. Well, did she really mean it as just a joke?" He sees Hubert still almost instantly. He turns to look at Ferdinand in his flustered state. "What do you mean by that?" Ferdinand takes a moment to consider his next words carefully. "I suppose I'm trying to ask you if there is any truth to her words." Hubert turns his head away from Ferdinand, but Ferdinand is able to hear his next words as if they were whispered right into his ear. "And what if there was?" Ferdinand gasps as an involuntary reaction. That was most likely the closest thing he was ever getting to a love confession from Hubert. He looks down at the bench and sees the little space there is between him and Hubert. Ferdinand decides to rest his hand on top of Hubert's, and he can feel Hubert recoil a little bit. But he ultimately relaxes again and turns his attention back to Ferdinand. "I would reciprocate your feelings fully," Ferdinand admits while he squeezes Hubert's hand in what he hopes is a comforting gesture. Neither of them know what to do, so they end up just staring at each other with tenderness in their eyes. Sometime in the tranquil moment, Ferdinand realizes that Hubert hasn't actually said anything back to him after he confessed his feelings for Hubert. "That is, unless I am reading the situation wrong and you do not in fact have feelings for me," Ferdinand says, trying to backpedal his way out of this situation. "In which case, please banish my confession from your memories. I do not want you to reciprocate unless you actually had feelings for me back, which I am aware—" "Ferdinand," Hubert interjects, ending Ferdinand's nervous ramblings. "Yes?" Hubert leans forward so that his forehead was touching Ferdinand's. "Shut up." Ferdinand felt Hubert's lips meet his own, and, goddess, if he hadn't wanted this for the longest time. He excitedly kissed Hubert back, but he made sure that he didn't get too lost in the action. They were still in a public space. Whenever he had thought about kissing Hubert, Ferdinand didn't know what to imagine it like, but he could say for certainty that this is better than any fantasy he could have come up with. Hubert's mouth feels warm against his, and he tastes vaguely of coffee and spices. They both break apart because they do need to breathe, but if Ferdinand didn't need to ever fill his lungs with oxygen, he is sure that he would be happy kissing Hubert for the rest of his life. That was... Ferdinand tries to describe how ecstatic he is feeling right now, how happy he is to have finally confessed and kissed Hubert, but he simply doesn't have the words to describe all of his emotions. As if realizing his inability to put his thoughts into words, Hubert smirks and leans forward to chastely kiss Ferdinand once more. "I think we should retire to our sleeping quarters for the night," Hubert says, while Ferdinand is struggling to catch his breath after having been kissed for a second time. "It is rather late, and we both know we are going to have a long day ahead of us tomorrow." Hubert stands up and offers his hand to Ferdinand. Ferdinand gladly accepts, and before Hubert lets go of Ferdinand's hand, he leans down and presses a gentle kiss to it. "Good night, my sunshine." He starts to walk off while Ferdinand is left there, love-struck, but he manages to regain enough of himself to call out to Hubert before he is out of earshot. "Hubert!" The man in question turns back to regard Ferdinand. "Tell Albanius and Medea to have a good night for me as well, and make sure you tell them I will be a spectacular brother-in-law to them some day." Ferdinand hears the sound of Hubert's dark, affectionate laugh from where he is standing. "I am sure they'll be delighted to hear it. I do hope that you will—" Hubert cuts himself off before he finishes his sentence. "No, never mind. Sleep well, Ferdinand." Hubert disappears back into the palace, leaving Ferdinand illuminated by the night lights of the garden, while he fondly looks down at his hand that had been kissed by the person he loves the most.